I've always been a fan of bargains. I mean, who doesn't love the thrill of finding something valuable at a fraction of the cost? Whether it's a vintage couch, a rare book, or an apartment with a low price tag, I'm always on the hunt for the best deals. And that's what got me into Craigslist. But sometimes bargains come with strings attached, dark, eerie strings that pull you into places you never wanted to go. I'm about to tell you the story of how I moved into an apartment that wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. And now I'm not sure if I'll ever escape. It all began with an ad. One-bedroom apartment, downtown, fully furnished. Cheap rent, must move in immediately. I know, right? Too good to be true. The pictures showed a clean, cozy space, modern decor, big windows, plenty of light. It was the kind of place that would cost a fortune under normal circumstances. But there it was, priced like a rundown studio in the worst part of town. I didn't even hesitate. I sent a message to the poster, expecting maybe a day or two before hearing back. Instead, I got a response within minutes. The guy's name was Mike, and he sounded pretty eager. We arranged to meet the same day at a coffee shop a few blocks from the apartment. He said he liked to meet potential tenants in public first to get a feel for them. I thought it was smart, considering all the crazy stuff that happens on Craigslist. But looking back, maybe he was the one I should have been worried about. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a table by the window. I walked over, and he greeted me with a nervous smile. He was an average-looking guy, mid-30s, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans. There was something off about him, though. He kept fidgeting, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds like he was expecting someone or something. "Hey, you must be here about the apartment." He tried to sound upbeat, but his voice was strained. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, taking a seat. "I gotta say, the price is crazy low for a place like that. What's the catch?" He forced a smile. "No catch. Just need someone in there ASAP. I've had some trouble keeping tenants." I should have taken that as a red flag, but I shrugged it off. "Trouble, huh? What kind of trouble?" He hesitated, and for a moment his face grew pale. "People complain about noises, shadows, cold spots. You know, the usual stuff. But nothing dangerous. It's all in their heads." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Oh, so it's haunted." Something like that. His eyes were serious, though, and that smile vanished. "Look, if you're not comfortable with that, I get it. But if you don't mind a little spookiness, the place is yours. Cheap, furnished, no hassle." I considered it for a moment. I didn't believe in ghosts, and even if it was haunted, how bad could it be? Plus, I was desperate for a new place. My old apartment was falling apart, and I was tired of dealing with noisy neighbors and leaky ceilings. So I agreed. We signed the papers right there in the coffee shop. Mike handed me the keys, and his hands were cold, too cold. I didn't think much of it at the time, though. I was just excited to move into my new place. The move was quick. I didn't have much stuff, and the apartment was already furnished, so all I had to do was bring my clothes and a few personal items. The first day was great. The place was just as nice as the photos, and I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. But as the sun started to set, the atmosphere changed. The bright, welcoming space transformed into something darker, something wrong. It was subtle at first. The air grew colder, and the lights seemed to dim. I blamed it on old wiring and a draft from the windows. Then came the noises, soft at first, like whispering. I couldn't make out the words, and every time I got close to the source, it stopped. I told myself it was the pipes or the neighbors. You know, the usual excuses. But deep down, I felt a growing unease, like something was watching me. A few nights later, things escalated. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. They were slow, deliberate, like someone creeping in the dark. My heart started racing, and I sat up listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. The door creaked open just a crack, and I could feel the chill seep into the room. "Hello." I called out, my voice barely a whisper. No answer. I got up, grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed, and slowly approached the door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, but the cold was intense, like I'd stepped into a freezer. I shivered, glancing around. Mike, I called out, even though I knew he wouldn't be there. Is anyone there? Then I heard it, a whisper so close, felt like someone was speaking directly into my ear. Leave. I jumped back, my heart pounding. Who's there? I shouted, but the only response was the soft hum of the building's old heating system. I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing away until I was pressed against the wall. For the rest of the night, I stayed awake, clutching the bat, my eyes fixed on the door. The next morning, I called Mike. Hey, man, you didn't mention anything about someone else having a key. I heard someone in the apartment last night. His voice was shaky. No one else has a key. It's just you. Look, I told you people hear things, but it's nothing. Just try not to think about it. Easy for you to say. I muttered, but I didn't push it. I didn't want to move again. Not so soon. So I stayed telling myself it was just my imagination. The following night, I set up a camera in the hallway, aiming it at my bedroom door. I thought maybe I could catch whoever or whatever was creeping around. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept one eye on the door, waiting. Around 3 a.m., the room went cold again. I could see my breath, and the air felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. The whispering started, louder this time, filling the room with a hissing sound that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my phone, watching the live feed from the camera. The screen showed the hallway empty, but then movement. A shadow flickered across the frame, and for a split second, I saw it, a figure tall and gaunt, standing just outside my door. It had no face, just a dark, swirling void where its features should have been. And then, the whisper turned into a low growl. Leave or suffer. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I scrambled out of bed, rushing to the door, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. The camera had stopped recording, the screen now showing static. I felt the cold again, and the air around me thickened. It was like stepping into a fog, a suffocating mist that clung to my skin. And then I saw it, something moving in the shadows at the end of the hall. It was crawling, its limbs jerking in unnatural angles as it dragged itself toward me. I froze, the bat slipping from my hand. My brain screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The thing stopped, and its head tilted, as if it was studying me. You can't escape, it whispered, its voice echoing off the walls. This place, it's ours. I backed away, my legs finally finding the strength to move. I slammed the door shut, bolting the lock, and pressed my back against it. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I dialed Mike again, but the call went straight to voicemail. Mike, this is insane. There's something here, and it's not human. You need to get over here now, I said, my voice cracking. The whispering continued, seeping through the walls, the floor, everywhere. I could feel it vibrating through the wood, echoing in my skull. And then I heard a knock. It was soft, rhythmic, coming from the other side of the door. My hand hovered over the lock, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. Let us in, the voice hissed, and I could feel the door vibrating under my hand. We know you're scared. I backed away, my pulse thundering in my ears. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching and twisting, forming faces that sneered and leered at me. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw Mike standing in the corner of the room, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. Mike, I whispered, stepping toward him. But as I got closer, his face changed. His eyes turned black, and his skin melted away, revealing the same dark void that I'd seen in the camera footage. Leave, he repeated, his voice distorted, echoing in a small space. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening, as hands seemed to reach out from the darkness, clawing at my skin. I screamed, scrambling for the door. But when I opened it, it wasn't the hallway outside. It was a tunnel, a long, dark passage that stretched into nothingness. And then something grabbed my ankle, pulling me into the darkness. I fell hard, my hands scraping against the cold, rough ground as I was dragged deeper into the tunnel. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as panic set in. I kicked and thrashed, trying to break free from the grip tightening around my ankle, but it felt like an iron vice, cold and relentless. The shadows swirled around me, whispering, mocking. "Don't fight it," they hissed. "It's pointless." I clawed at the floor, feeling the damp, gritty surface beneath my fingers. My nails dug into the dirt, but it didn't slow my descent. The tunnel walls seemed to pulse and breathe, the darkness alive and writhing. I screamed, my voice bouncing off the walls, but was swallowed by the void ahead. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the grip released me, and I was left gasping, sprawled on the floor. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes straining to see through the thick darkness. The tunnel stretched on, its depths disappearing into nothing. Behind me, the door to my apartment had vanished, replaced by more of that endless, suffocating black. "Where am I?" I whispered, spinning around, trying to find any sign of an exit. A faint light flickered in the distance, a tiny pinprick in a sea of shadows. It was my only option, so I moved toward it one shaky step at a time. The air grew colder the closer I got, the chill seeping into my bones. And then I started to hear them again, the whispers. "Turn back, turn back." The voices overlapped, merging into a twisted chorus that filled the tunnel. I felt a presence behind me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see what was there, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were calling my name now, each syllable drawn out in a slow, taunting chant. "Come back to us." I picked up my pace, my breath coming out in sharp, ragged gasps. The light grew brighter, but the tunnel seemed to stretch, the distance between me and the glow staying the same no matter how fast I moved. It was like running in a nightmare where every step felt heavy, like I was wading through quicksand. Suddenly, the tunnel walls narrowed, closing in on me until I could feel the cold stone brushing against my arms. The whispers shifted, becoming more frantic, and I could feel something moving just beyond the edges of my vision. Figures darting through the shadows, too fast to catch but close enough to sense. I stumbled, my foot catching on a rock, and I went down hard. My palms stung as they scraped against the ground, and for a moment, everything went silent. The whispers stopped, the tunnel went still, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged. Then I felt it, a hand, ice cold, grabbing my shoulder. I spun around, swinging my arm wildly, but there was nothing there, just the darkness. But I could feel it hovering just out of reach, waiting. I pushed myself up, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out. I sprinted toward the light, ignoring the shadows that clawed at my legs, the hands that seemed to reach out from the walls, their fingers cold as death. The tunnel seemed to shift and twist around me, the walls warping and stretching. The floor felt uneven, like it was moving beneath my feet, but I kept running. The light was close now, and I reached out, desperate to grab hold of it. But just as my fingers brushed against the glow, the ground gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling into the darkness below. It felt like I was falling forever, the air rushing past me as the tunnel disappeared above. When I landed, it was on something soft. I groaned, my body aching from the fall, and blinked, trying to adjust to the dim light. I was no longer in the tunnel. Instead, I was in a room, small, cramped, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. The walls were lined with faded, yellowing wallpaper that peeled in long strips. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I pulled myself up, my body stiff and sore, and looked around. The room was empty, save for a mirror on the opposite wall. It was old, the glass cloudy and cracked, but something about it drew me in. I felt an urge to walk toward it, and despite every instinct telling me not to, I took a step forward. My reflection stared back at me, pale and frightened. But as I looked closer, I noticed something was wrong. The reflection wasn't moving the way I was. It tilted its head, eyes narrowing as a slow, unnatural grin spread across its face. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. What is this?" I whispered. The reflection's grin widened, and its eyes darkened, turning into empty, black voids. It raised its hand, pointing directly at me, even though I hadn't moved. "You should have listened," it hissed, its voice echoing in the small room. I stumbled back, my back hitting the wall. The mirror's surface rippled, and the reflection's hand reached out, its fingers stretching through the glass like tendrils. They clawed at the air, reaching for me. I tried to move, but my feet felt glued to the floor. "Stay back," I shouted, but the tendrils kept coming. I pressed against the wall, my heart racing as the fingers brushed against my skin, cold and wet. The light flickered above me, and the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and merging into figures that circled me, their faces blank and featureless. They whispered, their voices overlapping, creating a chaotic, dissonant hum that filled the room. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out. "This isn't real. This isn't real," I muttered, but the whispers grew louder, their voices seeping into my mind. I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, and I jerked my hand away, only to feel the same grip around my ankle. I opened my eyes just as the reflection pulled itself halfway out of the mirror, its grin now impossibly wide, its eyes hollow and black. It whispered, "It's already too late." With a sudden burst of strength, I broke free from the grip and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands outstretched, feeling for any exit. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking, and I could feel the air grow colder, tighter, like it was pressing against my skin. Then I saw it, a door barely visible in the dim light. I lunged for it, grabbing the handle and throwing it open. I tumbled through, expecting to find myself back in the hallway, but instead, I was outside, standing in the middle of a street I didn't recognize. The sky above was a deep, unnatural shade of red, and the buildings around me loomed like shadowy giants, their windows black and lifeless. The air was thick with fog, and every breath felt like inhaling smoke. I stumbled forward, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of where I was. That's when I heard it, low guttural growl coming from somewhere behind me. I turned, and through the fog, I could see a figure slowly emerging. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It tilted its head, and for a moment I thought I saw Mike's face, twisted and contorted, staring back at me. No, this can't be happening," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. "You never should have stayed," it said, its voice a distorted echo that sent chills down my spine. "Now you're one of us." I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as the fog thickened around me. The figure disappeared into the mist, but the growling continued, closer now. I spun around, searching for an escape, but the street seemed endless, stretching out into the darkness. Suddenly, hands shot out of the fog, grabbing my arms, my legs. I tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth, cold and clammy. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but they pulled me deeper into the mist, the whispers surrounding me, closing in from all sides. "Welcome to the nightmare," a voice whispered in my ear. And then the world went black. The world was black. Not just the kind of darkness that comes when you close your eyes, but an endless, consuming void that felt alive. The whispers continued, echoing in my mind, wrapping around me like chains. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, and the cold was so intense it felt like my bones were freezing over. The hands dragged me through the blackness, their grip unyielding and claw-like, scratching against my skin. I tried to fight back, but every struggle felt weaker than the last. It was like something was draining me, stealing my energy, my will to resist. I had no sense of time, whether it was seconds, minutes, or hours that passed. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the darkness felt infinite, and I was sinking deeper into it. Then, just as despair began to settle into my bones, a light appeared in the distance. It was faint, like a flickering candle flame in the vast night. It wasn't much, but it was something, and I focused on it, reaching out with every ounce of strength I had left. The hands seemed to weaken, their grip loosening as I moved closer to the light. I stumbled forward, forcing my legs to move, and felt the hands retreat, slipping away into the shadows. The whispers faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the air. The light grew brighter, and as I reached out, I felt warmth, something real, something alive. I pushed through the darkness, feeling it peel away from me like layers of thick, suffocating smoke. And then I was through. I stumbled into a room bathed in a soft, golden glow. It was the apartment again, my apartment, but it looked different. The walls were no longer peeling, the furniture was pristine, and the air was warm and filled with the scent of fresh flowers. It felt like stepping into a memory of a place that was once full of life. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. Relief washed over me. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, that the nightmare was finally over. But then I noticed the mirror again. It hung on the wall, polished and shining, reflecting the room perfectly, except there was no reflection of me. A shiver ran down my spine, and I took a hesitant step toward it. The mirror felt wrong, like it was a portal to something other than the world I was standing in. My hands shook as I reached out, and the surface rippled beneath my fingers, like touching water. I pulled my hand back, my skin tingling with a cold that wasn't right. Before I could move away, the image in the mirror shifted. The room disappeared, replaced by a swirling mass of black smoke. And then through the haze, a face appeared, my face but twisted. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits, and its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, one that sent a jolt of fear through me. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The reflection's grin widened. "You know what I want? You let us in." Its voice was a distorted version of mine, layered with whispers and echoes. "No, I didn't. I didn't ask for this." I stepped back, my heart racing. "Let me go. You can't escape. You belong to us now." The reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass, the grin stretching wider until it looked like its face was splitting apart. I turned away, desperately searching for an exit. But the door that had led me back here was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Panic clawed at my throat. I was trapped. The room, which had once felt warm and safe, now felt like a cage closing in on me. The lights flickered and shadows danced along the walls. The temperature plummeted, and I felt the air grow heavy, pressing down on my chest. My breath fogged the air, and the whispers returned, louder, overlapping, creating a cacophony that rattled my skull. "Stop, please," I screamed, clutching my head, but the voices only grew louder. The shadows moved, taking shape. They formed twisted figures, their faces stretched into grimaces of pain and horror. Their eyes, dark and empty, locked onto me as they reached out with skeletal hands, clawing at the air. No, this can't be real," I muttered, backing away until I felt the cold surface of the mirror against my spine. The shadows lunged, their hands grazing my skin. I felt a burning cold wherever they touched, like frostbite seeping into my veins. I tried to fight them off, but they were relentless, pulling me closer, dragging me back toward the mirror. "Let me go," I screamed, thrashing against their grip. I didn't do anything. The reflection in the mirror watched, its expression twisted with glee. "But you did. You opened the door. You let us in." My voice broke off as a memory surfaced. The night I moved in, Mike's warning echoed in my mind. "If you hear anything at all, just leave." I had stayed. I had ignored the signs. I had given in to my curiosity and disbelief. The figures tightened their grip, and I felt myself being pulled backward. The surface of the mirror rippled again, and this time, it felt like hands were reaching out from the other side, grabbing hold of me, pulling me into its depths. I fought, digging my nails into the frame, but the shadows were too strong. The cold was unbearable now, and every breath felt like ice filling my lungs. My vision blurred as the figures whispered in my ear, "Join us, join us." I was dragged through the glass, my body passing into the freezing void beyond. The room around me faded, and I felt the sensation of falling, the world turning upside down. My screams echoed, but they were swallowed by the darkness. I hit the ground hard, and the cold floor knocked the air from my lungs. I pushed myself up, gasping, and looked around. I was back in the tunnel. The same endless, black void stretched before me. The walls pulsed, and I could see shapes moving within them, faces that twisted and turned, their mouths opening in silent screams. A door appeared in front of me, illuminated by a faint, eerie light. I didn't want to open it, but I had no choice. My body moved on its own, drawn toward the door like a moth to a flame. As my hand touched the handle, a chill shot through me, and the door creaked open, revealing a hallway identical to the one in my apartment building. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The hallway was dimly lit, the walls lined with faded, peeling wallpaper. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. I walked, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. "Mike," I called out, even though I knew he wouldn't be there. "Is anyone here?" The only response was the sound of something scraping against the walls, a soft, dragging noise that sent chills down my spine. I kept walking, the hallway stretching endlessly before me, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure at the end of the hall. It stood motionless, its back to me, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure slowly turned, its movements jerky and wrong. When its face came into view, I felt the blood drain from my body. It was Mike, but his eyes were hollow, black voids, and his mouth twisted into that same grin I had seen in the mirror. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said, his voice a whisper that echoed down the hall. "Now you're part of it." I stumbled back, the shadows creeping closer, reaching out with clawed hands. No, this isn't real. It can't be." Mike's grin widened, and the hallway walls began to close in, the space tightening around me. The shadows reached for me, their touch like ice burning into my skin. I turned and ran, sprinting down the hall, but no matter how fast I moved, the end always seemed out of reach. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent. "Join us. You belong to us." I reached the end of the hall and found another door, its surface covered in strange, shifting symbols that glowed faintly. I grabbed the handle, yanking it open, and stumbled through, falling into a blinding light. When the light faded, I found myself in the apartment again, but this time it was in ruins. The walls were crumbling, the furniture overturned, and the floor was covered in ash. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke, and a low, eerie hum filled the space. I moved forward, my footsteps leaving prints in the ash. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deep, rumbling growl. I turned, and there it was, the same shadowy figure I had seen in the camera footage, its eyes glowing with that sickly, yellow light. "Why?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Why me?" The figure stepped closer, and the shadows seemed to pull away, revealing its form, tall, thin, its skin stretched tight over bone. Its grin was impossibly wide, and its eyes locked onto mine. "Because you let us in," it hissed, the words dripping with malice. "You opened the door. You invited us." I felt my strength drain as the shadows closed in, their hands cold and relentless. The figure reached out, its fingers brushing my cheek, and I felt a sharp, searing pain. I screamed, falling to my knees as the world around me faded, the apartment disappearing into the void. The darkness swallowed me, and I felt myself slipping away, my vision dimming. And then, just as I thought it was over, the whispers returned, louder than ever. "You can't escape," they chanted. "You're ours now." As the shadows engulfed me, I felt myself being pulled into the depths. I reached out one last time, but there was nothing to grab onto. Nothing but the cold, endless black. The last thing I heard was the sound of the door creaking open and a voice, my own, whispering from the darkness,